and all the worker bees are all, ooh, oh, you know, it's good. You know, they're like, they're women. What am I going to do?
You're already at the last module, Module 8. I hope you've learned a lot so far. We're going to wrap up the class by talking about swarm management and also some of the different problems that you could face with your hive. But let's start out talking about swarms. It's a natural thing that honeybees were born with the urge to do, and it's really hard to stop that from happening. But as a beekeeper, you don't want them to swarm because you lose half of your workforce, and so your honey flow slows down.
In any given year, it's a 50-50 shot whether you're going to have swarms or not. If you make some timely manipulations of the hive, sometimes you can avert swarming. But chances are that queen, if she's an overwintered queen, she's going to want to swarm. You know, and you better be prepared to do something with that hive, or it will swarm and it will not make as much honey as it had potential to make.
Your prime swarm is May and June. Middle of May to middle of June is when it's strongest. Now, if it gets warm early, you could start seeing swarms in April.
The main reason is they probably need more room. They've outgrown their home and they're now strong enough and confident enough to split, and half of the bees will just up and leave with the queen. The whole idea is that one of the new queens that's getting ready to emerge will stay behind with half of the bees and rule the hive. And the old queen hightails it out of there with the other half of the bees, and they look for a new home. One of the most obvious signs is that they'll start making new queens. At first, you'll start seeing these queen cups. This is the start of a queen cell. The bees make them just to be prepared when it's time, so it's no big deal if you see these. It becomes a queen cell when the queen lays an egg in it, and then the nurse bees start to feed it royal jelly and then cap it. I often wonder if the queen realizes she's laying an egg to eventually replace her. Before the new queens hatch out, half of the hive decides to leave, and what they do is they gorge themselves on honey to prepare for their journey, and they take the current queen and suddenly one day just leave. This most often happens in the middle of the day on a nice day. This decision is made by the worker bees, and they've already had a few dozen scout bees out there searching for a new home. Before they get to their new home, they might rest, though, on a park bench or a mailbox, and they could be waiting for some scout bees to come back. Or remember, the queen hasn't left the hive or flown at all since her mating flight, so they might be giving the queen a chance to rest before they move on to their next location. And this normally happens within sight of their current hive.
Well, sometimes the bees actually know where they're going to go before they leave the hive, because they'll send out scout bees. But normally they'll come out and they'll go within 100 yards or so, and they'll hang in a tree. And they send out scout bees. And it's kind of like, I don't want to pick on my religion, but it's kind of like Episcopalians. We have to form committees. And so they form these committees to go out and look for a place. And if the bees go out, they all go out, and they go out and they say, wow, this is really cool. So they come back and they report in that they found a really nice home. Well, this other bee comes back and he said, well, I found it better than that. And they go on, and what really winds up who gets the most excited about their place. And then the bees, once they decide, they may send other bees to check it too. And if it's really good, they'll leave some bees there to guard it until they can get back so somebody else doesn't get it.
So what can you do? Here are some suggestions. Number 1, reduce overcrowding. You can add an additional brood box to give them more room, or maybe put a super on earlier than you normally would need to. Also, make sure that the bees have some sort of a top entrance, and that will give forager bees a way to get in and out without having to go up through the brood nest. Congestion can also make it hard for the whole hive to pick up the queen pheromone, and that can add to the desire to make new queen cells and then to swarm. Another idea is to reverse the brood boxes. And as Jim mentioned before, that cluster in the winter moves up and eats honey, stays together to stay warm, and then they reach the top brood box and they're out of room. So in the spring, if you reverse the brood boxes, that gives them more room to keep going up and they'll feel like they have more space. You could requeen the hive because hives are less likely to swarm with a new queen. Or you can do my favorite thing, and that is just split the hive yourself and get it over with.
If you start to see swarm cells in a hive, the bees are going to fly away anyhow. You might as well make a split and do it in your timing and not their timing. Because their timing is not convenient for your timing.
If you see queen cells, what you do is find the old queen and remove the frame that she's on and put her in another hive or maybe in a nuke box. Then take an additional 3 to 5 frames of brood and bees and honey and add them to this new hive you have with the old queen, and you've created a swarm and kept all your bees. Make sure you put the frames that have the brood on it in the very center of the hive, and then put the frames with honey on the outside because that's how the queen likes it. Some people ask if you should just go ahead and cut out the queen cells to prevent them from swarming. Well, I think the bees probably already have it in their mind on what they're going to do. Plus, if you cut out the queen cells without finding your original queen, there's a chance your hive could have already swarmed. And if you kill all the queen cells, you might be leaving your hive queenless. So think twice before you do that. Now let's talk about how to catch a swarm so you can get free bees, or you might want to be running after your current bees that have swarmed if you can get to them.
And what they do, they go in like a cyclone or tornado. They fly in circles, but they're moving as they're going. And they're completely non-aggressive. They've ate as much honey as they could eat before they left the hive, and they'll move to the new home.
The first thing to tell you is only do it if it's safe. So if the bees are up too high in a tree or on a ledge or somewhere that you can't reach, it's not worth it. Let them go. Don't try to get it unless it is really safe. Bees that are swarming are really gentle. They're not likely to sting you. They have gorged on honey, which makes it hard for them to sting, and they're not guarding the hive. There's no brood or honey stores for them to guard, so they're very gentle. What you should do first if you go after one is find something to put them in, something that is not airtight. You don't want to suffocate them. So a cardboard box works great, or again, if you can find that nuke box that you bought the nuke with at the beginning of the season, that works great too.
But most swarms are really easy. I mean, you've been with me. We've cut the branch off, held them over a box, and they'll walk in. I had a swarm that was on a low branch on the ground, and I set the hive in front of it and got a few bees and got them in it. And they all lined up, and I got myself in trouble with this too, like little Catholic school kids going into class with the nuns on it. They actually got in line and they're marching into the hive, because all they wanted was a home, and you've supplied them with a home and food and everything else now.
You can just put the box up under the swarm and knock it in it and then close the box up. Hopefully you got the queen and everything in it. If you're patient, you can get a swarm sometimes to run right into a box. They're happy to say this is home, and they'll run right in. Some beekeepers put down a white sheet on the ground and put a hive down and then knock the bees down, and the bees are on that white sheet so they don't get lost in the grass. And cut the branch off and lay it right on top of a box of comb. Those are just some of the things that you can do.
And here's something else to keep in mind. Make sure your box is big enough for the whole swarm. Swarms can range in size from a grapefruit size to a big watermelon size, and you want to make sure you get all the bees in there, so get a box big enough for whatever swarm it is you're after. If they're on a big branch, what you want to do is put your box underneath of them and grab a hold of the branch and give it one big shake. Make them drop down all at once. And remember, the queen will be in the center, so you want to get her in there. If you get just some of the bees down in the box and the bees start immediately flying back up to the branch, she's probably still on the branch, so you might need to repeat that. If the branch is small enough and you can use your shears, just cut off the branch and lay it right down on top of your box and let them find their way in on their own. If your bees have landed on a wall or some other object that you can't shake, what you can do is first spray them with the sugar water to keep them busy, and then gently brush them down either with your bee brush or even your hands, because again, they're really gentle, and push them down into the box.
I got a swarm one time. I was cleaning hives up on the patio, and all of a sudden all this big rush of bees and everything, and they actually moved right into one of the boxes that I was cleaning up. And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And I set it on the back of the truck and brought it down and put it on a stand.
And now let's talk about the problems that your hive could face. As a beekeeper, there are a lot of things to keep an eye on. I'm going to talk about a few things that you need to watch for. Again, you need to connect with a bee club, join a group so you can post photos if you have questions or ask experienced people what's going on in your hive. But you've probably heard about colony collapse disorder. It was discovered in 2006 by a Pennsylvania beekeeper named Dave Hackenberg when he was tending to his hives in Florida, and he noticed honeybees were just disappearing from his hive. More than 10 million bee colonies around the world were lost to this. It's been reported that the value to agriculture from honeybees is about $200 billion. So you can imagine the concern about our world's food supply when so many bees started disappearing. Some experienced beekeepers reported 50 to 90% of their hives were lost. Now, there's still no agreed upon reason for this. We know for sure the VARROA mite is causing the biggest problems in the hive. Pesticides are also a big concern, especially those neonicotinoids. A loss of habitat is a concern because people are keeping their lawns free of weeds and cities are expanding, so there's less to eat. Also, commercial beekeeping practices themselves have been blamed. Most people agree that it's probably some sort of combination of all of these things that's to blame for CCD. So as you're opening up your hive for your inspection, if you see something that you don't think looks right, then it's always a good idea to ask somebody else about what's going on in your hive. The first thing I want you to keep an eye out for in your hive is the VARROA mite. It's a parasitic mite that feeds on the bodily fluids of honeybees, and it actually develops, though, in the larva, specifically in the bigger drone larva, so you need to keep an eye out for that.
VARROA mite, everybody. That's like saying your dog doesn't have fleas. Yeah, he does. And if he doesn't have them today, he's going to have them tomorrow. And it'd be like a VARROA mite. When VARROA mite first hit, I think around '89, I knew it was coming, but you know, until you actually see it, I had 7 hives at the time, and I lost 7 out of the 8. And they had VARROA so bad it looked like my bees had measles. You know, and I bought treatment, and I treated them, combined them, but I only saved 1 hive.
And the VARROA mite carries a lot of viruses that damage honeybees. One sign to spot it is if some of your bees have deformed wings. Lots of beekeepers open up some drone brood larvae and look for mites attached to the drone, and that's how we found this one here. Another thing you can do is what's called an alcohol wash. You get a scoop of bees, about a half cup of bees, which is about 300 bees. You get them from the brood chamber area, and then you shake them in alcohol for about a minute. That will dislodge any of the mites, and pour it out, and you can get an estimate on how many you have and how seriously you need to treat the hive.
Your bees are not going to make it through the winter if they have high mite loads. Even a handful of mites sometimes can vector viruses into the bees. So anything you can do any time of the year to rid the hive of VARROA mite, you want to try to do that. There is some givens that I've learned, it was some hard learned lessons because it cost me a lot of money because a lot of bees died for me to learn a couple things. Uh, by August 15th in the central western Pennsylvania area, you better have done something by then to control varroa mites. That's a given. You better have it done. Whatever you're using should be done that treatment cycle, and then you still have to follow up later on and do some more treatment. Assessing bees, learning how to use an alcohol wash to assess colonies of bees for their mite levels is very important. If you can find them with that alcohol wash, it's probably getting close to trying to, something to treat. If you're finding ones and zeros, that's not so bad. If you're finding threes and fives, you better think about treating. If you find 20, that hive is dead and you just don't know it.
There are several different things to do to treat for mites. Formic acid. You can use these strips called Mite Away Pro strips. Formic acid is found naturally in honey, and at high concentrations, it penetrates those wax cappings and kills the mites. You cannot use this, though, if the temperature is above 85 degrees because it'll damage the bees, or you can't use it below 50 degrees because it just doesn't work well.
Formic acid strips. It's formic acid, which is a natural occurring in the hive. We just put it in at a higher concentration, and it's deadly for them. It can be a little bit hard on the bees. You can lose some brood. You could lose a queen if she was like not great. So you have to make sure that after it's a 14-day treatment, or you can do one strip for 10 days and then put another strip in for another 10 days. That way you're catching the brood that are hatching out as they're hatching out. I used to do that, and my losses were excessive last year. So this year I went to the 2-strip treatment.
Oxalic acid is another option that we use. It's a natural compound found in plants such as rhubarb. We use the dribble method like this, but this does not penetrate the cappings. So if there's any brood there, this treatment won't work. You only do this treatment in the late fall when the queen is done laying her eggs.
I do the dribble method, which is you mix it up. There's a formula, and I put it in with, I used to use like a hypodermic, a big 50 milliliter that you would maybe give horses medication with, and you put 5 milliliters per frame of bees. You don't do it, if there's no bees in a frame, you don't do it. The other thing you can do now, and I don't do this, is vaporization. You can put it in and you vaporize it, the acid in the hive, and you can do that in the summertime. You do it for 4 weeks in a row, a week apart or 5 days apart, and because it still won't kill bees under the cappings, but it gets everybody. And from what I hear, it works pretty well. You have to use a really good respirator, not something that you use for COVID. It has to be organic vapor respirator, which will cost you $40, $50. What I do, and this is not the only way to do it, is I use formic acid generally twice in the summer, and then I use oxalic acid around Thanksgiving. Formic acid, Mite Away Pro, will kill the mites under the cappings, and it's approved for use with honey supers on. Oxalic acid is deadly to the mites, but it won't kill mites under the cappings. So you have to wait until around Thanksgiving or a little while later, when the hive's broodless, and you put that in, and you'll see on your inspection board, you'll see hundreds of mites.
Nosema is a problem that you might face, and it's not too serious. It's caused by a spore that invades their digestive tract, and it basically causes bee diarrhea.
That's usually a wet and cold disease. There's 2 different types of it now. One of them, You notice diarrhea all over the hive, black strips. In worst cases, it can be even on the frames on the inside.
What do you do about it?
It usually will go away. They used to tell you to feed fumagellin, but they found out that was harder on the bees than, as a preventative. So, everything's changing.
You may see some small hive beetles running around because they like to live in the beehive, and mainly the honeybees can fend for themselves, but if your hive gets overrun with small hive beetles, that can cause a problem. Mainly they slime all over your honey, so you don't want that.
Small hive beetles, they're another opportunist. They come in and the bees will chase them and they'll keep them corralled, and if the hive's strong, the hive beetles will not take over. What you have to do though, everybody got them now. When you take your honey supers off, you have to extract within a couple days. There was a guy last year, he didn't extract for a week and a half, and when he brought him to me, I was going to help him extract. When he picked them out, there was all this larva there, and he thought it was wax moth. I said, no, that's hive beetles. And they get in your honey supers, where wax moths want to get in the brood box. And they get in and they eat it, and there's excrement, they slime the hive. People brought it to me and I've double bagged it and thrown it in the trash.
You can buy some small hive beetle traps to assist your bees in fighting them off. You'll need to protect your hive against wax moths. They don't attack honeybees so much, but they get in there and they like to feed off of the cocoon in the brood chambers and that dark brood comb.
Wax moths are a problem and where brood has been raised, because the wax moth larva feeds off the skins from the pupa.
You'll spot this because your honeycomb will be webby. Yuck.
Wax moths, they're another opportunist. They're not a problem with a strong hive. I've had people say wax moth killed my hive. I said, no, your hive was dying and wax moths moved in.
A strong hive doesn't need a whole lot of help in fighting off the wax moths. They can handle that on their own. Freezing will kill them, so if you live in a higher elevation, you have that going for you. Otherwise, you might want to take the frames that are impacted by the wax moths and expose them to sunlight, because those moths hate the sunlight.
Wax moths are like the maggots of the insect world. If you would take a hive and a tree that say it died, wax moths would move in, eat all the stuff, and it would all fall down, and the hive would be, if it had disease, the disease would be gone. So they actually serve a purpose in the wild.
Mice will cost you money. They chew on the comb and they disturb the cluster. You don't want mice in your hive. So there's two ways of doing that. You have to either screen the entrance or put an entrance reducer on that's small enough, and or have cats. If you have enough cats around, the cats will get the mice and you won't have any mice problem in beehives. So
European foul brood is a bacterial disease that doesn't have spores. So you can get rid of it sometimes by requeening, other times just by less stress on the bees.
Something called chalk brood is a fungal brood disease. It's caused by a spore, and what happens is the fungus is sort of competing for food against the brood, and the brood ends up sort of white and chalky.
Chalk brood, that'll usually go away too. That's a springtime problem that can go away. You can also requeen for that.
Then there's the biggie, American foul brood. It is by far the most destructive thing that can happen to your hive.
American foul brood is an extremely contagious, deadly disease. It used to be, before there was antibiotics, that if a bee inspector found you had foul brood, he burnt your hives right there on the spot. You didn't have a choice about it. And the bee inspector still has that power today.
So how do you spot it? Well, it's kind of easy, because your hive will smell like rotting fish.
American foul brood is economic disaster. If you get that in a hive, it will kill the hive or damage it to where you can contaminate everybody else's hive and your other hives. So you want to be aware of what it is. You want to be aware of what to do to treat for it. We used to be able to buy antibiotics at the farm store to be able to prophylactically treat for it, and you can't do that anymore. You have to have a prescription from a veterinarian now, and I'm still waiting. Hopefully, we won't have any trouble, but I'm waiting to hear 1 year where there's a lot of foul brood around. But being aware of it, knowing what to look for, will keep you from having problems. The bigger operations are the ones that have the bigger problems. But I've seen small ones, have that too. So
what do you look for?
stringy, ropey, dead brood. A cell will be the brood will die in that cell, and if you stick a straw of grass in it and try to stir it around and pull on it, it stretches before it snaps back. There can be other brood diseases that brood could die, but it won't snap back, and it's not foul brood. So.
And it smells.
It smells very bad, like rotten meat. So once you've had it and smelled it, you'll never forget the smell.
And the problem with it, it leaves spores behind. And the spores are viable for up to 80 years. So if you would get old equipment, and that's the one reason we don't recommend a new beekeeper buy used equipment, unless you really know who you're buying it from.
You'll also want to be aware of pesticides. Try not to use any pesticides in your own yard, but if you're somewhere where there are farms around you, check out the farm schedule of when they're going to spray their crops. And what you want to do is close up your honeybees the night before, keep them in their own hive for the whole day of the spray, and that way you can protect them. You might notice a lot of dead bees right in front of your hive. That could be a sign of pesticide poisoning.
Pesticides can be a real problem, but most of the bees will die in the field before they get back to the hive.
Finally, let's talk about the most famous thing that attacks beehives from Winnie the Pooh on down, and that is bears.
Bears, if you're hit with a bear, either move your bees or put an electric fence up, because he'll be back.
Bears love to go into apiaries, usually in the middle of the night, and go after the honey and especially the brood. Bears love to eat the brood. So what can you do? Not a whole lot. Once bears find your apiary, they're going to keep coming back. You could try to ratchet strap down your hives. That'll at least keep them together if the bears tip them over, but they could come apart, so that's no guarantee. We've had to put up some bear fences. We get the solar bear fences. It gives them a little gentle zap to discourage them from trying to get to the beehives. And that wraps up our class, Bee to You Beekeeping, lessons from our honeybees straight to you. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you understand my passion for honeybees. I do wish you the very best with your own hives.